Grace and the Goblin's Bargain. Allow me now to tell you what became of Grace Whitaker 10 years after the Goblin Scrix first crawled over the railing of the old bridge and tried to plant doubt where there was none to plant. If you recall, he failed that September evening in a most thorough fashion, and one might have hoped that failure would discourage him. Goblins, however, are not the sort of creatures who take discouragement to heart. Grace was 22 years old now, and she was not the child she had once been. She was a young woman of quiet strength, the kind of strength that doesn't announce itself or stand on any table to be admired. She moved on her crutch the way a river moves around a stone, smoothly and without complaint, and those who watched her cross the old bridge over Little Sugar Creek in the summer evenings would have said she moved with a kind of grace that suited her name very well. She still came to the bridge in the long evenings, still dangled her one leg over the side, still let the water's conversation with the stones do her thinking for her. Some things, when they are good, do not need to change. It was on one such evening, when the fireflies were just beginning their little arguments with the darkness, that Scrix appeared again. He rose from the shadow beneath the bridge boards the way unpleasant things often do, which is to say, gradually, so that one cannot pinpoint the exact moment the shadow became a creature. He was exactly as Grace remembered him, grey-green and large-headed, with eyes the color of old tallow candles. He grinned his wrongly shaped grin. "The little sparrow," he said, "has grown." "The goblin," Grace replied, "has not improved." Scrix seemed to find this amusing. He settled himself on the railing with the ease of something accustomed to sitting where it isn't welcome. "I've come to ask you something," he said, his voice as smooth as it had ever been. "It's a simple question. Would you like 2 good legs, child? Would you like to walk as others walk?" "Of course I would," Grace said, and she said it the way she'd learned to say true things plainly and without shame. "I've also learned to live with what I have, and I've learned that there are things in this life more important than another leg." She looked out at the dark and easy-moving water below them. "Kindness is one, honesty is another." The goblin didn't care for that answer, which is how she knew it was the right one. He shifted and smiled again, this time with more teeth. "Then perhaps you'll care for this," he said. "The fairy kept a secret from you, a cruel secret. I know what it is, and I know how you might get your leg, and I'll tell you both for a price." "You tried 10 years ago to make me doubt her," Grace said, and she didn't say it meanly. She said it the way one states the nature of rain. "I doubt your words, Scrix." The goblin winced when she used his name. They never like that. "Dewberry lied to you," he said, and his voice dropped to the pitch that is meant to sound like truth. "She's been lying since you were a little girl." Grace was quiet for a moment. She was young, but she wasn't foolish, and she knew the difference between a wound meant to heal and one meant to fester. "Even if I believed you," she said at last, "I have nothing to give. My family's poor. We've always been poor." "There's always something," said Scrix. "What do you own, Grace? What is there in your house that you might trade?" She thought of the brooch. She hadn't meant to think of it, but the mind goes where it will, and the goblin saw the flicker of it cross her face the way that goblins do. "My mother has a brooch," Grace said slowly. "It was handed down to her by her mother's grandmother, a small frog carved from jade." She straightened herself on her crutch. "I won't. I can't give it." The goblin put on his most generous expression, which was still a rather unsettling thing to see. "Here's my offer," he said, spreading his grey-green hands wide. "I tell you the secret. I will tell you how to get the leg. If you don't get your leg, you pay me nothing. The brooch stays in your mother's drawer." He let that sit in the air between them like smoke. "All I'm asking is that you hear me." Grace said she would think it over, and she agreed to meet him at the bridge the following evening. Now, what happened between that evening and the next is the most important part of the story, which is often the part left out of simple tellings. Grace went home, and she sat with herself a while. Then she went to find Dewberry. She found the fairy in the cedar glade at the edge of the hollow, which is where fairies can sometimes be found when they believe no one is looking. Grace told her everything the goblin had said, every word, and then she told her what she was planning to do. Dewberry listened, and when Grace had finished, the fairy was quiet for a long time. "You're braver than you know," Dewberry told her. "I know exactly how brave I am," said Grace. No more and no less than I need to be. The next evening, Grace returned to the bridge. She carried in her coat pocket the jade frog brooch, which was cool and smooth against her fingers. She'd brought it only to show the goblin, only to let him believe the story had gone as he'd written it. Scrix was delighted. He told her that if she went to the fairy cave and took the queen's scepter, she could have one wish, and with one wish she could have her leg. It was a fine story, well constructed, with just enough truth in the frame to hold the falsehood upright. "Now," he said, and his old penny eyes went bright. "Let me hold the brooch, only to look at it, only to see the craftsmanship." Grace held it out and he took it, and then he laughed the way that goblins laugh when they believe they've won, which is the most certain sign that they haven't. "You humans," he said, "are so very easily tricked." Just then Dubry appeared on the rail of the bridge, her light steady and warm, the same light Grace had followed through the dark hills all those years ago. "The scepter," she said pleasantly, "has no power to grant wishes. It never has." She looked at the goblin with something that was very nearly pity. "Goblins are so very easily fooled." She nodded at his hand. "Look at what you're holding, Scrix." He opened his hand. There sat a small green frog, very alive, very indignant, and in the next moment it leaped from his palm and fell into the dark water with a sound like a single note played on a string. "Fairies," said Dubry, smoothing her wings, "are quite adept at creating illusions." Scrix said several things then that aren't worth repeating. Low words that smelled of creek mud and old grievance. And then he dropped over the side of the bridge and was gone, back into whatever shadow he called home. Grace and Dubry sat together on the old boards, listening to Little Sugar Creek go about its ancient business below them. The first stars were coming out above the ridge, one by one, the way good things often arrive, quietly and without fanfare. "You didn't need me," Dubry said in her small voice that you had to hold your breath to hear. 10 years ago you said the same thing," Grace replied. "My answer hasn't changed." She looked at the place where the goblin had disappeared, then looked back at the water. "I'm glad you came all the same. That, as anyone who has ever trusted the right person at the right moment knows, was the whole of the matter."